Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
I'm loving what we're going to talk about today because it's kind of the baseline for everything. It is the science of
You got it.
the science of decision making. What makes you or your team or people you're involved with, relationships, how do they come up with a certain decision? What's the science behind it? It's not just I'm going to make a choice here, A or B. There's a lot more going on. We're going to dig into that. And he's somebody that coaches all different types of people, executives, individuals. He's an author, a speaker, a pilot, and he's also the guy behind coaching for relevance.com. Randy Swaim is back with us. Hey, Randy, how you doing?
Hey, great, Steve. Good to be here as always, man. Good to work with you on this.
Same. We learn so much every time we talk with you, and this one's a pretty interesting topic we got going on here in terms of the way decisions are made.
Yeah, and you know what? It is key, and if you look at it, and the people that are listening, when you think about perhaps, experiences with teams that you work with, you will probably at least see some little subtle hints of evidence where the wrong side of this came into play. And are we aware, particularly as leaders or becoming leaders, are we aware of that, and how are we going to make it right? So it's just kind of an interesting point in there in terms of thinking.
In terms of thinking, how does somebody make a decision? What's actually going on scientifically in their brain?
Well, I'll tell you what, let me just share the first part of this because what you're saying there is right. One of the big things that gets in the way of a lot of teams today, and let's face it, not everything, as I've said countless times on the shows and everything, not everything fits a rote academic scenario, and so often today, people that are managers that are trying to get the best or whatever, because they're thinking wrong, they're actually shutting off their team's ability to really process and understand that. And in fact, one of the things that I kind of listen for, it really brings this aspect of neuroscience into the picture here that I'll kind of share just briefly, but we'll have some time to kind of bring some questions and stuff like that for sure. But one of the things I found it very interesting, and you've seen examples out there, but all over our society, we have a lot of people that are trying to lead people that are working for them, reporting to them or whatever. And in fact, sometimes you see this in nonprofit organizations where the manager is trying to drive the emotions, get the emotions going, fired up. And, and it's interesting that one of the reasons they do that is because if I make you grossly emotional, I can control you. And you don't have to think because your emotions are driving it all. And what's interesting is I was listening to somebody speaking. I think I mentioned this to you. Her name was Deborah, and I think her name was Folletta, kind of thing, her last name. If I mispronounced it or missed a letter, my apologies, but Deborah was her first name. But she's a certified professional counselor. And the way she put it was totally in line with where I'm going. And by the way, this topic I'm also bringing to a roundtable discussion on June 21st that's focused on neuroscience and neuroplasticity and everything. This roundtable event I'm going to be the head of. And but it's interesting because she said that old school research from decades ago, everybody had this mindset in their picture that, and you probably have heard somebody say this along the way, that emotions drive your thinking. Emotions make you think, kind of thing. And she said it correctly when Deborah said, you know what? Unfortunately, modern day research shows that is not true. And it shows just the opposite. It's actually the other way around, because when you look at it, what your brain is thinking, remember the frontal lobe is what brings the processing into play. And once your brain kind of senses the picture, it releases certain chemicals like oxytocin, which could be a feeling of synergy and real teamwork and family, norepinephrine, which is fight or flight, kind of thing, and things of that nature. And it's the brain that releases the chemicals to drive the emotions, not the other way around. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. And what I tell people is simply this aspect, that if you're trying to drive emotions in your people and use that as a control freak mechanism for your people, not only are you disconnecting their belief in your leadership in a lot of ways, but what you're also doing is you're having them shut off their mental processing, their ability to perceive and process the situational awareness that seems to be coming on scene. And what you're doing is you're taking their ability to process that part of their brain and just putting it in the closet and locking the door. And so what you find is that when you're in a challenging situation and your team is the one that's right at the front line to it, they can't process, they can't see it, they can't perceive it, they can't make good decisions. And in fact, and that's a challenge for your team. And it also limits the aspects of the satisfactory results that you want. So this difference between the dysfunctional aspect, and one of the things you've heard me say this on the show before, the concept of the dopamine fix that a lot of people are dependent on. Dopamine is the chemical that your brain releases to try to feel rewarded. And what a lot of people do by generating emotions in other people so that they just shut their brain off and they just capitulate to me, it's driven by my focus on my dopamine fix, that I can just kind of pat myself on the back for doing that, kind of thing. And it's not that way to across whatever for every situation, but it is something that comes into play. But these are two very different things, and one is true and one is not true. When you're talking about this old school thinking of emotions generate your mind, no, that is not true. It's not even close to being true, and it's not leadership, and it's disconnecting some of the things your team needs to be successful, particularly in a situation that is a little bit more unpredictable, where it doesn't just fit a rote academics thing. But if you develop your leadership ability to gain your team's processing ability, and you know what? When they start to see the possibilities in this of the successful outcome and what that might look like, all of a sudden they start generating some oxytocin within them. They start generating this ability to feel synergistically together, and let's accomplish this. Yeah, let's do this kind of thing. And they begin to get that fired up feeling of wanting to get across the firing line here and get to the solution where we all know we achieved it together. And so all of that it's a very different picture. And a lot of people today still go to that old school way of thinking that is not even effective. It wasn't true then. Just the research from decades ago suspected that. But the current research that we have now, and this is what this speaker was talking about correctly so, that disprove that way of thinking. And it's exactly the opposite. It's your brain, as you start generating the picture of what it's going to be like. If you start generating the processing where you could get a sense of, boy, you know what, this is why we want to accomplish this. It's not just so I can get a pat on the back. It's not just so I can get $20 extra or whatever or anything like that. But it's like, you know what, if we do this, boy, not only have we accomplished something amazing, not only maybe will people talk about us, but you know what? If we accomplish this thing, we're actually better able to handle an even more stressful situation because we've taken the step in a good direction in what we're becoming and all of these kind of things. But once you get that picture in your brain and there's some clarity on that, not just superficial where the leader says, we want to do this, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is having conversations with your team so that they can create that. And that's something that is key when you're talking about not taking your team's processing ability and throwing it in the closet and just locking the door. And I'll just tell you that one of the things to do that sometimes, and you've heard me say this before, but I think I mentioned my 3 P's of success, and the third P was proactivity. And there are times when, guess what? You, the leader, have to be proactive and bring that to your people a little bit before it's actually required. So they give some thought to it and they get the picture of it. And so when the factors come on board, the factors may be just a little bit different, but because they have processed it all and they have clarity on it, they know how to adapt and adjust and make it happen. And so these are just some key things, but these are 2 different aspects. One is the old school that's not even correct. It wasn't then, but just nobody had the facts to understand it. But this aspect of the other way of, helping your team process their brain so that they really gain clarity on that. Sometimes, when the chemicals are released by the brain, guess what? That'll generate some emotions. But at that point, success can really happen. And so it's just an interesting difference between those 2.
Do you feel, and I want to go back to what you said before, Randy.
Yeah.
Those on the front line, they're the ones that can't effectively make decisions because they're in the fire. Their emotions are flying high, running high. In that situation, as a leader, should you kind of lean back on them and not worry about them making these decisions only because they're in I guess it would be a vulnerable spot?
You know what? And I would say this, that are there times with a leader, depending on your situation, and let's take it to a combat situation like you're talking about it. There times when you would take some leadership in it and not just have them do it while people are shooting at them. Yeah, there can be some times on it, but here's the benefit of it. If you went with this true mindset of generating their processing, there's a couple of things that are a benefit out of your people when they hear what you're leading. Because as they're getting shot at and they hear you give an order and they go, oh, you know what? Yeah, that's right in line with kind of what we need to do. Yeah. They go, yeah, let's do that. Or if they see some unique factors coming on scene that you didn't expect, and they hear your little of adaptation to it because they've had some processing ability on it, they don't get that flight feeling inside. They know that you're for their benefit. And again, that can be built when you're helping them process and you're not just having them shut their brain off and obey what I tell you to do kind of thing. And all of that is a way that you can build this aspect of synergy and belief in the team, even when times are tough. And so a lot of that, are there times when the leader would need to step up a little bit more? Yeah, there are. But you know what? Depending on how you prepared their mental processing, and I don't mean just do what I tell you to do. That's kind of an overly simplistic, stupid way of doing it. But if you've given them the picture and experience to a certain way where they kind of see that what you're doing is right in line with that picture, they trust it. And they know that, yeah, this is right. This is good. And so all of those, there's several different aspects of what you just said. It's a very good question, but it's some aspects about thinking about that. And are there times, interestingly enough, particularly when you're talking about war, it sounds kind of crazy, but are there times when the leader's got to go out and stand in front of the people and say, let's go, you follow me, and take the lead into it? Yeah, there are some times throughout history, there have been some times where the leaders had to do that. But you know what? When the people get a sense where it's not you just telling them what to do, but you are their teammate and you're leading it, and they sense that and they experience that, what it does is it gives them a degree of confidence because of what they experienced in this processing time. But that doesn't happen just because you got emotions. And so it's a key difference that a lot of people in today's world don't truly understand. But if you understand neuroscience and you understand how the brain really works and how that success really happens and how the person's situational awareness is higher because they had a chance to process it over the last few days or whatever, all of that is a key part of this.
Do you think a lot of managers, leaders play the emotional card? So,
Yeah,
you mentioned that before, and I can see
yeah.
that clearly happening where they know how to press the buttons of some of their employees so that they can get them more vulnerable. It's a mind trick, basically.
I wouldn't say it's a mind trick, it's an emotion trick.
Sure.
Because the mind trick, the one place where it is a mind trick, but the short answer to your question is, do I know that there's people out there that do that? Yep, kind of thing. Unfortunately, yes, it's part of. In fact, it's part of our whole society.
As I think about it right now, I've got it, and it's somebody I worked with years ago, and I have to call him back at 4:30 today.
Don't tell him I said anything, right? No.
However, I'm in a different place because
Yeah,
he was my superior way back in the day.
yeah.
He works, basically I buy from him.
Right. There you go. There you go. There you go.
But when I think of it, he was pretty crafty in doing that. As I watch other employees, and I'm going to say,
Yeah.
especially women, he would
Yeah.
know what buttons to press, and and I would hear them say, "I can't believe I got to deal with this today." No, well, maybe there's a reason that it's going down that way.
And you know what? Some of the people that do that, it may sound a little bit crazy, but it's a real professional thing, in my view, in the way I'm thinking on this question. It's a good question.
I'm
But
not.
are there people out there doing that? Yes, there are. But here's the thing. Does it mean that they're playing games just because or whatever? What it could mean is that as they came up through the ranks, this was sort of taught to them because back in the day, they thought this was the way to work. But you know what? They have not seen the new way and the truthful way of doing it with no understanding of how they're shortcutting their people.
Right. They don't
And
know what they're actually doing.
that's right. There's a certain aspect of training that they have to, bring in. And it doesn't mean you got to go out there for a 6-month course or anything like that, but an awareness aspect of it and how this kicks into be that people have to be aware of. And so that's the key.
I'm throwing questions out here. Here we go.
Go for it.
The people that do that, do you think that they might lack some confidence, and that's how they place themselves a little stronger in their positioning by preying on the emotions of their team?
As an executive coach, I would say absolutely. Does it mean that it's every single one out there? No, not necessarily. But are there some that, like you said, feel that way? And so what they're trying to do is keep our team spirit, if you will, keep our spirit from going somewhere where I'm not comfortable or whatever, and all this kind of stuff. It's interesting. I shared a situation with you back when I was the site manager at Griffiths Air Force Base up in Rome, New York. And there was, I heard my team, just very quickly, I heard my team coming up with a new idea. And most people would try to jump in and control that. What I did is I let them explore it for a little bit. And one guy was going to sit down. One of the aviators was going to sit down and write out some notes on a pad. But halfway into his chair, he froze because all of a sudden he realized, oh, the boss is here. And he looked at me like this. And all I did is I looked at him and I winked and I nodded my head. That's all I did. I just winked at him and I nodded my head. And he just smiled and sat down and wrote some notes and stuff. But are there a lot of people that are not comfortable with that because of things that maybe they're afraid of, or they're not comfortable with, or they're not confident of, or whatever? Maybe there was some situation that they had in their journey that made them scared of it.
Sure.
And so are there people like that deal with that? Yep, absolutely.
Interesting. Well, I don't want to give anybody ideas.
Yeah, but you know what? When you're talking about leading your team, if you get some evidences where somebody on your team, and this could be like an executive level guy looking at one of the managers that works for him, you know what? If you start to see some evidences about that, how do you need to coach them to help them overcome that? And it isn't just by dictating to them or whatever, but it's about modeling that aspect of a facilitative coaching approach to leading people. And so yeah, it's a key thing. But yeah, that there when you look at these two differences, the old school way, which was never really true and is not true now, versus the real uh, uh, scientific way of how the brain works and where the emotions come into play from the brain, not the other way around, kind of thing. It has a lot to do with how the leaders need to interact and how they need to employ what they do so that they get the best out of their team, even when the situation is not just rote academic. And so it's because I'll tell you what, you're doing a great job as a leader when people on your team all of a sudden come up with a result that is magical, and you would have never pictured that.
Right.
But you just look at them and go, "Good job, guys! Good job."
What
All of you ladies and all you ladies and guys, I just so appreciate you guys are amazing.
it's what we're talking about. If not even just for leaders, but people on the team to be aware of. Let's say
Yes, it is.
advisor that's acting a certain way. There may be reasons for it, but at least you can identify it,
Mm-hmm.
and just have better landscape clarity on the whole situation, which is what you do when you coach and you
Mm-hmm.
people, right?
And you think about it, if your people feel that, you want to talk about a level of synergy that you would have never imagined. When those people feel one together,
Yeah.
wow, how did I make that happen? Well, you didn't. You just led in such a way that they created it within themselves. And like I say, if you understand and you get their processing going and get the brain in, that's going to generate some of those chemicals. But it's not like the other way around, which is what years ago people thought. So it's really a key point, and it's a key aspect, as you can sense, that when you're talking about leadership, and actually when you're talking about developing your team to people, developing leadership in your team people so that they can be promoted up and do well for the company years down the road, kind of thing, and prepare them for promotions and stuff like that. All of that also comes into play with how this works and how this plays out. And guess what? If you really make it great and really apply it well, guess what? Your company, your organization's better off. And so it's just some aspects about these two different, approaches, these two different pictures of it. One that's not true, but one that is totally true and aligned with neuroscience. But if you get that, guess what? You're going to be a leader that your boss looks at you and goes, you know what, madam or buddy, you're awesome. Tell you what, we got this higher position available. You interested in putting in on it, kind of thing, and you never know. So it's
And
big thing.
what we're talking about is things that was our perception of how emotions are driven, or vice
Mm-hmm.
versa. How do we work with you? How do we find you, Randy?
Okay. It's as you know, you can go to my website at coachingforrelevance.com, and it's down at the bottom of the first the homepage there. You'll see my email and my cell phone number. As you know, I don't do sales calls, so if you call or whatever, I'm not going to give you a sales pitch. If you got a need that you're looking possibly for a coach, yeah, we'll come up with something. But just to build relationships, to have a conversation, let's do it. And
Sure.
so but that's a key aspect when you look at this particular concept, because this is something that's very different than a lot of people 30 years ago were taught.
I think it's exciting learning this because now when you work with anybody, now you know how they're coming up with the decision, what's driving it. I always thought it was the emotion.
Yep. And
But-
and most people do, because that was the old school thing that a lot of people were teaching.
Right.
And like I said, I'm actually going to be bringing this up onto the roundtable event on June 21st. But it's just it's a key insight for leaders to understand. And how are you doing it in a way that is truly effective and is truly going to get you there? Or how are you going back to what you gravitated to, what you learned, say, 30 years ago incorrectly?
Yeah.
And because if you're applying it that way, you're taking your team's processing ability and vision and throwing it in the closet and locking the door. That you don't want to do, for sure.
Well, I have that phone call at 4:30 with that guy that used to do it all the time.
Well, I'll tell you what, I know it'll be a friendly phone call for you guys for sure. And nothing bad. But like I said, it's just something that, it's an old school thought that was not truly true then, although people didn't have any evidence or research that showed anything different. But now people are realizing, when you understand how the brain works, this other neuroscience related aspect is really the heart of it all.
In theory, the old school thought makes sense. So that's we'll subscribe to it. Randy, thank you so much for being here today. Learned a lot.
Sounds good. Well, I'll tell you what, Steve, we'll look forward to doing it again.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.